Hello, it's Angela with Aging Gratefully, and I am coming to you today with what I'm going to call a little bit of a story time. Now, one thing that I often say is that I've been writing since stick figures were all I could spell. And I mean that quite literally because I can distinctly remember that when my parents would read to me, I imagined that I wanted to write as well, even as a little child. So on the blank pages of the books, I would draw little stories, and in my mind, I can remember thinking to myself that, oh, I'm published. Oh, my story is in a book. And that was all due to having my little stick figures in a book, a picture book that my parents read to me. Fast forward to today, and my stories have been in books. They've been in magazines. They've been on TV. My stories have been in the places that I dreamed of as a child. And so that's why I say I've been writing since stick figures were all I could spell. Because it's true. It's very true. So who am I? I'm Angela. I'm starting a YouTube channel called Aging Gratefully. I am jumping on the bandwagon along with a lot of other creators to be over 50 and speaking and sharing my wisdom, talking about what it means to be a writer, lots of other topics that I've thought of, and I want to see what is going to connect with you, as well as being able to share with you those aspects of my life that I think you might find interesting or that might be helpful. So that's where I'm coming from today. I wanted to talk a little bit about how not only have I been able to write and get my own work into books, but I've also been able to help others through creative writing classes that I taught, through my own workshops that I mentioned, and also through an anthology that I had the pleasure of working with 12 fabulous women on. And it's right behind me here. It's called The Mama Stories, Gifts from Our Mothers. And it is available, of course, for you to purchase on Amazon. Or if you'd like to purchase your copy from me, there is a link in the description that has that information on it. So this is my story time. If you caught my earlier video that I did posted on Sunday, it's all about my YouTube journey. I want to see whether I can get monetized, how long it might take if I do, following in the footsteps of some other YouTubers such as Silver and Solo, who inspired me. And I've always had this desire to have a YouTube channel from the very beginning. I was a television reporter in my early years, and I felt like, well, who better to be on a YouTube channel than a person who has some experience with television, with writing for TV, with producing stories, shooting. Although the technology has really grown and changed over the years, there's still some components of television, of showing up for people, of writing for TV, of writing for the screen, of writing for other people that just pretty much stays the same. So that's why I'm here, and I'm gonna share more of my story time in a few minutes. Life. The teachers that made a difference in my life. And first I want to start off with Mrs. Bremer. I've got to be honest, I don't remember For some reason, I feel like Mrs. Bremer was in junior high. She was a substitute teacher. She was a teacher that I really connected with. You know how sometimes when you have a substitute teacher, it feels like, oh, okay, this person's kind of jumping in and not really doing what is needed, for the class, or they seem like they're just there to pick up a paycheck, or they're just babysitting. Well, Mrs. Bremer was way more than that for me. There were several assignments that Mrs. Bremer assigned me that I remember to this day, and I just loved her so much. I want to say it was 8th grade, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure it was not high school, though, because high school, I can remember each teacher, and the only teacher that really left for a substitute was Mrs. Jones when she left to have a baby. So, and the sub that we had was functional, but nothing like Mrs. Jones. So, Mrs. Bremer, I just want to give a shout out to Mrs. Bremer. When it came to English, she and I were like on the same page. I made a booklet that was poems featured in our literature book, and I literally drew the pictures and wrote out the assignment, wrote out the words, wrote out the poetry, and of course I made a really good grade on that paper. I want to say it was 8th grade. In high school, it was Mrs. Jones, freshman English. She was tough love, very tough love, but she was interesting. She didn't have favorites. Everybody was persona non grata when it came to Mrs. Jones. And that was where we started with Shakespeare. I can remember Shakespeare. We did Romeo and Juliet. I want to say we might have done, I don't think we did Macbeth with Mrs. Jones. I think that was later on. But I remember we watched a video about Romeo and Juliet, and we read sections of it in class. It was a lot of fun. You can tell I'm a nerd, right? I'm officially a nerd. I'm a person who enjoyed school and who loved English classes. Fast forward to Mrs. Banks. Mrs. Banks was my junior English teacher, and that was the year that we did term papers. And she reminded me of a bunny rabbit. She would bounce around the classroom the entire time. And you know what? Come to think of it, she might have been when did we do term papers? Wasn't that junior year? For some reason, I felt like she was junior year when we did our term paper. And I believe Mrs. Elmore was senior English. But blame it on my brain and not the heart. But one thing I definitely remember from Mrs. Banks, she, back then we didn't have the term politically incorrect, but oftentimes Mrs. Banks would ask questions of the Black students. There were only a few in there. It might have just been me and my friend T. And if there was some topic relating to Black people, at some point in the class, Mrs. Banks would turn to us and ask us for the opinion or from the perspective of Black people. That wasn't ideal. It was uncomfortable. I wasn't of the age to say anything. I didn't even really, I don't think that I really thought that much about it, nor did I feel like I had a voice to say something about it. But it was just uncomfortable. But I'll say this for Mrs. Banks, and I really want to know your opinions on this, what I'm getting ready to say right now. I loved Edgar Allan Poe in class. And when it came time for us to do a term paper, I wanted to do my term paper on Edgar Allan Poe. Mrs. Banks sort of, I don't want to say forced me, but she highly encouraged me to consider doing my term paper on Langston Hughes. What do you think? Is that assuming that the black student has to do a term paper on Langston Hughes? Or is it encouraging the black student to delve into one of the greatest literature writers and poets of the Black Renaissance period? I'm going to go with the second part of that. I'm going to go with the latter. If I have to really admit it, in my heart of hearts, I would love to do another volume of the Mama Stories, Gifts from Our Mothers. I would love to have the opportunity to work with women to help them tell their story, to encourage them, to give them the skills, to edit the stories, to provide the platform for them to be able to speak their truth. That's what I would love to do. And in order for me to do that, I need for you to reach out to me. Go ahead and hit the link in the description to sign up for a discovery call, and let's find out if this is a fit for you. I'm really looking for people that would like to get their story out, published, and establish a platform for themselves. And some people really just want to get that story out. And some people really want to be published. Either way, I want to be able to help you with that. So go to the link in the description, the link in the comment, and sign up for a discovery call. And let's see if this is right for you. So earlier I was talking about teachers and how so many of the teachers that I worked with throughout my career as a student were beneficial. They made a difference. And I was telling you about Mrs. Banks earlier. Well, one of the things that I learned in Mrs. Banks' class were all of the different careers that were available to people who were interested in English. I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. Everyone was telling me, well, if you are interested in English, then the only thing that's available to you is to be a teacher. And while being a teacher was a very valiant role, and you can see from what I've said a few minutes ago that teachers made a big difference in my life. I just wasn't sure if that's what I wanted to do. And so one day I was looking at the wall in Mrs. Banks' class, and I saw this sort of circle or like a little diagram that was circular, and it had in the middle of it English, and then out around it were all of the different fields and things that you might want to study if you were interested in English when you went off to college, or just professions that you could have. And one of them was journalist. And I was like, ooh, I would like to do journalism. I'd like to explore that. I would have the opportunity to write, interview people, tell stories in that manner. So I said, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a journalist. And that's all because of Mrs. Banks. So Mrs. Banks, if you're up there, thank you for having that diagram in your class, because it made a big difference. So let me tell you what then ended up happening. One day in school, we were having I think it might have been punk rock day or something in high school, and a TV crew was there. And I remember going up to Jan Pate, who was the reporter that was talking to all the students. I allowed her to interview me. And after she interviewed me, I said, hey, I am interested in journalism. One day I'd like to do an internship. I'm going to be graduating XYZ. I must have been my senior year. And I'd love to do an internship at the station here in Florence. She says, okay, I'm going to be on the lookout for you. Soon after, I went off to college and I kept in touch. Actually, I'm pretty sure I wrote a letter to her before I left. And then I kept in touch with her throughout my 4 years of school. Well, it turns out that she left the station, and but she communicated to the news director and the head producer to be on the lookout for me. So when I connected with them, I was able to do an internship over the summer, and it was a fabulous experience. I got to be embedded with the other reporters. I made connections and contacts and got to know them. And that summer, I also was a radio personality, board operator for a couple of news radio programs in Florence as well. So your girl was working it. I was working it. I was like, listen, this is what I want to do. And I was able to get paid at the radio station, and I did the internship for free. You see how I was doing that? After I left the internship that summer and went back to school, I still continued to keep in touch with the folks at the station, and I decided that I was going to go for it. I kept in contact with them. I said, hey, I'm going to be graduating, and I would like to have a job as a reporter for this station. And it worked out. I went down for the interview. I met everyone, and I started working at WPDE TV 15 as a television reporter, and I did that for 2.5 years. So I guess you could say it's thanks to my teachers, thanks to Mrs. Banks. And even though creative writing was really my love and what I wanted to do, I'm so glad that I learned journalism, because it made me see a story in a different way. It taught me how to be concise when writing. It taught me how to interview others. And these are all skills that I use today. So thank you for listening to my story time. Please, if this resonates for you at all, I'm asking you to subscribe to my channel, Aging Gratefully. On Sundays, I will be sharing my YouTube journey. And during the week, I will post at least one video, probably on Thursdays, where I'll explore topics relating to aging gracefully. And today I was sharing about, I was sort of giving you a story time, sharing a little bit about myself, a woman who's over 50, who's on YouTube and is doing what everybody said do. Get on YouTube if you're over 50. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for listening. Please, if something resonates for you, don't hesitate to make a comment, and stay tuned for the next video.